I'm going to be speaking, I've got the privilege of talking about an individual because this individual, a War of 1812 veteran, we have enough information to recreate him in his full life. I'm going to emphasize the period after the War of 1812 because that's where most of the information is. He is an Ojibwe from the North Shore of Lake Ontario. These folks were called Mississauga by the British settlers, and so they really, though, are Ojibwe. So same folks as Walpole, and he is an example of someone that can be described in some detail. He's one of the people I include in my book, Mississauga Portraits, one of the 8 chapters. And I just wanted to say before I continue, the book has come out, indeed. It has 8 portraits. It's a follow-up from the first book, which is about Peter Jones, a very important Mississauga or Ojibwe leader in the 19th century. These are 7 additional characters that Peter Jones knew. And I'd like to say that at the beginning, though, I've been just bowled over by a new book, which does which I cannot do in my book. I'm non-Aboriginal. I've done my best. I've studied these people for many years, and I've done my very best to bring them to life, but I don't have the language. I bet I fooled you at the beginning. Oh, yeah. Anyways, I don't have the language, and I don't have the culture. But a gentleman who does is Cecil King from Manitoulin, distinguished educator, National Aboriginal Award winner. He has finished his book, Balancing Two Worlds, John Baptiste the Siganak and the Odawa Nation, 1768, 1866. Book's just come out 2 weeks ago. I was at the launch in Saskatoon. Cecil's living there now. And anyways, it is from the inside. So I wanted to point that out right at the outset. My book is it's from the outside. I did the best I can, but it's from the outside. Cecil's from the inside. It's very important. It's not the story of a Siganak that we heard today, but it's a different Siganak, a very important War of 1812 figure, an Odawa from Manitoulin. It's really, really good. So, a tip of the hat to Cecil before I begin, and now I've got 16 minutes. Now, my talk is about the sloping sky. And his name, the name he used in English was Joseph Sawyer. And he is a Mississauga. He was born in 1784, around 1784. And he was a time of terrible uncertainty and confusion. This was described by Rick Hill as the world upside down. And that truly was what it was. In this period, the first treaties are signed. Joseph Sawyer is raised with the idea that this is going to be good news, it's going to be sharing, and of course, by the time he's in his late teens, it's turning out to be something quite different. The settlers are encroaching on the hunting and fishing grounds. There is tremendous lack of cooperation. And other problems are the mortality. We know that the Ojibwe in the western end of Lake Ontario, 2/3 of them died from disease from the 1780s to the 1820s. They are surmounted by incredible problems. Now, I'm going to just begin with this image. This is what I thought Joseph Sawyer. I did this work, my PhD's on this topic, and I saw this portrait of Joseph Sawyer. It's done in the 1840s. I saw this portrait and I thought to myself, gosh, this guy is, I mean, he doesn't look extremely happy or anything, but he doesn't look angry or sad or whatever. He seems to be at peace with what's happened. This is after the War of 1812, it's 1840s, and he seems to be quite with it. He had done a lot, you know, he adopted English, he'd learned English, he dressed like a British settler. He had helped his people enter into settled life and become farmers. He'd done everything, and he seems to have been, well, not knocked him out or anything in enthusiasm, but he seems to be relatively content. Well, I just want to begin with this, how images can be deceiving. I saw that portrait about 1972, 73, and then I saw it again 2 years ago. And it had been cleaned. The portrait had been cleaned. And the overpainting taken off. That is the real portrait. Does he look happy? Does he look contented? No, that's the real Joseph Sawyer. And this was just towards the end of my book, and I realized, now I'm going places, I realized what this horrible experience was for him. He'd done everything, And still, he was not allowed, the Mississauga, the Ojibwe on the north shore of Lake Ontario were not allowed to stay on their reserve outside of Toronto, 20 kilometers outside. They were not given a title deed, they were not given title. And they fought and fought and fought for it, and they failed. They had to move. That is why he looks like that. One word, betrayal. Aftermath of Tecumseh, betrayal. So I'm quickly going to run through this, and if I miss anything, I've got my slides, so I'll get 2 runs at this, and I'll be very conscious of the time. So Joseph Sawyer was born 1784. He's a Anishinaabe. He's of the Anishinaabe group on the north shore of Lake Ontario, once again, who acquired the name from the British settlers of Mississauga. He heard from his parents, from his grandfather perhaps, I'm not sure if he was able to meet his grandfather, but certainly his parents. He knew about the wars with the Americans, the American Revolutionary War. And the Mississauga fought with the British, beside them. And just to introduce you, this is their territory, traditional territory, the Mississauga. It's interesting, Premier Wynne has begun to say in public addresses, and in the opening of the legislature, Ontario legislature earlier this year, she said, she thanked the Mississauga, we are in the traditional territory of the Mississauga. So she's beginning to catch on, the Ontario Premier. Well, that was their territory, just to get us all situated. And this is what the land looked like. This is actually where I was raised, Oakville, Ontario, between Hamilton and Toronto, and that's by Mrs. Simcoe, the Lieutenant Governor's wife. She did wonderful sketches. And so there's not, in his early boyhood, before the War of 1812, there is settlement, yes, but it's not as intensive, of course, as it's going to become. It still was an Ojibwe world. We don't have time to stay with this image because probably 12 minutes now. This gives you the names, though, the Ojibwe names at the western end of Lake Ontario. This was an Ojibwe world. The Haudenosaunee had come and were on the Grand River, but this was where the Ojibwe had been Anishinaabe for 100 years. And these are the names that they had. So he's growing up, traditional world. He was born, his territory, his family was at the head of the lake. That means Hamilton today. He would have been on a vision quest, no doubt about that. We don't have a tremendous amount of information about his boyhood. Once he converts to Christianity, we start to get a lot more information. But he would have no doubt had a very, very traditional Ojibwe upbringing. Settlement comes into the picture. This is a great shot. It's 1804, and this is Bkejwanong. This is Toronto. This is York, as it was called then. And that gives you a good idea of how little settlement had occurred. This is about several hundred people, and that's in 1804 when he's 20 years old. When the war broke out, he supported the British. The Ojibwe came forward, and reasons have been so well brought. We've reviewed this well. He was one of those Anishinaabe that took up arms to the British, and we know for sure he fought at Detroit. So he was with Tecumseh. That's for sure. He fought at Queenston Heights as well, and he's also at the defense of Toronto in 1813, in April. So loyal British ally. That's that famous image that's often used of Queenston Heights. He was there. And that's an image, the siege of Toronto in April 1813. So he fought there. His mother was lost, actually, in the retreat. He lost his mother. Well, after the War of 1812, it is extremely terrible for the Ojibwe on the North Shore of Lake Ontario. As Rick Hill said, the world was upside down. And he becomes there's disease, there's intrusions by settlers, there's the devastation of the war in this area. This is where the war was fought, Niagara Peninsula and all. And then there's a fourth element, and that's substance abuse, alcohol abuse. He loses the respect of his people because he becomes, it's alcohol. He absolutely loses the confidence of his people. He's going nowhere. And this is where the story turns around in terms of documentation, and we start to know a lot more. Okay, the forest is being devastated. The whole country is being changed. But the catalyst for change comes, his nephew, Peter Jones, is converted to Christianity, to Methodism. Now, Alan, you mentioned Tecumseh and his brother the prophet. I think we've got nothing in known history is ever the same exactly, but there's a bit of a parallel because Joseph Sawyer is the political leader of this Reformation, Sloping Sky, and Peter Jones is the spiritual leader. He is converted to Methodism, he becomes very devoted to it. His mother is Ojibwe, he knows the language, he translates hymns, and is a good speaker. He brings his people, his uncle first, and others, into Methodism, that's United Church today, and they take hold of it. They take hold of it so much so, they carry the gospel throughout the Great Lakes. These are Anishinaabe taking the Christian gospel. Now, why? Well, those are deep waters, that question. But I think it's because of certainly disruption in the society, these all inexplicable things that are happening, and the alcohol abuse, everything. Methodists, of course, nothing to do with alcohol. I think they are, but I think ultimately they're attracted. And here, this is open to debate. Gosh, I'm not saying I've got the answers, but it's the core values. They see enough of the same core values in what Peter Jones is saying in Ojibwe for them to take hold. And they do. They decide to form, they get some good support. Edgerton Ryerson, after whom the university is named, is a Methodist preacher, and he's right there beside them. They, with the white Methodists, set up a village at the Credit River and begin to argue for land rights. They want to recognize that river mouth is still theirs. They haven't surrendered it. They also want to learn how to farm so they can hold their own and not be replaced from this area. And they want to stop, they want good education. They want economic development. They want to govern themselves. And they want to do this. This is the phrase of Peter Jones. Forever. Forever. If this had worked, Toronto would have some knowledge. I mean, it has some knowledge, but it have greater knowledge of Aboriginal people. The problem now is, in my view, there is no large First Nations community right beside it. And there hasn't been since 1847. That's the problem. Toronto's a black hole, in my opinion. Mind you, I come from Calgary. But it doesn't get it. It doesn't. Non-Aboriginal people don't get it. And I think the reason, this is the tragedy for me, of Joseph Sawyer's dream, and Peter Jones' dream not succeeding. Well, anyways, they give a good run at it, and they start this village. That's a camp meeting, fire and gospel. And the Ojibways, the Mississauga go into this with great enthusiasm. That's the village, and 2 families in each of those cabins, by the way. And everything changes, of course, at least on the surface it does. You don't change culture in a couple of months or a couple of years. We know that now. But it appeared on the surface, lots of things changed. Everyone gets a name, an English name. They keep their totems. They keep their language. These are Christians. These are Indian Christians, folks. They're not having to speak in English and all this kind of thing. The hymns are in English. The hymns are in Ojibwe. The sermons and all works, it's Ojibwe. But they get the English name, and the school is started. The idea is to learn English so they don't get cheated by the traders anymore and they can defend their land rights. But, alas, it does not work. The government is inflexible. They will not recognize the title of the Mississauga to this 4,000 acres, where Mississauga is today, where Port Credit is today. They will not give in. They won't recognize that title. They claim that the Ojibwe surrendered that. And well, they didn't know English then. They didn't have any knowledge in 1818 what the heck this thing was supposed to mean and all the wording. I don't even understand legalese now. I'm a non-Aboriginal person who's been raised in the culture. So, but no compromise. They have to move. 6 nations welcome them to come beside their territory on the Grand River, and so they do. But what? Oh, with what anguish? And that's the look on Chief Sawyer's face in that second image that I showed you at the beginning of the show. He has done everything, but it's not good enough. So off they go, New Credit, and I must say, New Credit has been wonderful to me over 40 years. And I'm very partial to theirs. When I talk with Mississauga, it's usually about the New Credit people because I know them so much better than those at Curve Lake, Alderville, and Rice Lake, and Scooga. Wonderful people, but I don't know them as well as New Credit. I think Tecumseh's, well, what is Tecumseh's, what's the legacy? What's the result of the vision? I don't know. Everyone takes something different from this. I take this. Persistence. Because they don't friggin' give up. They go to this new place. They have to clear the bush again. They have to go through the whole process. And they do it. And they emerge as farmers again. And they acquire self-sufficiency. They make the transition. They're indestructible. Now, please, what do I got? About 3 minutes? Okay. I'm not saying Chief Sawyer, he was a bit of a martinet, you know, and Peter Jones was as well. I mean, it's like Methodism is not joyful. I mean, it is spiritually, but not in terms of no dancing, no partying. Well, it's kind of tough. Not everyone bought into this. Not at all. And the one character that really is the opponent, he's the nemesis of Peter Jones and Joseph Sawyer. Very talented gentleman, Mangwadas. And Mangwadas was here at Walpole. He's the translator, that famous exchange between the Jesuit fathers and the traditional elder. It's a really tremendous event. It's 1844, it's here in Walpole. And, well, he was the translator, Mangwadas. He was respected by the Jesuits, he was respected by the First Nations, but he's just an incredible guy. But he did not think Peter Jones and Joseph Sawyer were going the right route. Boot camp was not his idea of Christianity. And he professed he was a Christian, but it just wasn't his stuff. So they asked him to become a chief, he refused. Instead, he started a Wild West show and went to Europe. He did very well. But Peter Jones said, don't go. And you see, here's where the thing is never black and white, you know, it's always gray. Peter Jones was right. He said, don't go because you're gonna, you die. There's so many diseases there. This is a disease-ridden place. And he was right. A couple of Walpoler people went with him and his family to Europe, and half of them died. So it was horrific. But Mangwadas emerges, there he is. Here he is, that's in Chicago Historical Society, that wonderful picture. He's the fellow on the, just second from the left. And so he's the nemesis. And, well, when I'm picking a cover, where do I want to go? I want to go with Mangwadas. A little bit of fun. So he's on my cover of the book, and Mangwadas is, that's a painting. Talk about gifts from heaven by Paul Kane. Paul Kane, the famous Canadian artist, painted him in 1851 after he performed at St. Lawrence Hall in Toronto. And Mangwadas, goes on, but he never goes back. He's not going back to boot camp, and he stays in northern New York. And we know a lot about him because of digitalization. The newspapers have been digitalized. That is, there's a man in northern New York, he's taken 20 million newspapers, pages, and he's digitalized them. So you put in Mangwadas, whammo, the only Mangwadas you get is my guy. So I've got a lot of new references to him. I know that he lived 1870s, and that was the last reference I have. But leave him aside. There are other voices. In my book, I've got 8 voices. There's no consensus here. But for those that follow Peter Jones and Joseph Sawyer, that was an answer for them. They stayed at New Credit, they went to New Credit, they persevered, and that is their church. This church is one of the oldest churches in Ontario. It goes back, I think that building, the original one's mid-1850s, and Joseph Sawyer is buried in front of that church. So that's their legacy. That's what but to me, it's persistence. And they did it. They became farmers. Now, what the horrible part is the language. And this is the tragedy, because the church doesn't, that support doesn't continue for the language, and it's not supported. And also they're right beside the Six Nations, so they don't have a large Ojibwe-speaking population beside them. And the language is back now. They're teaching it in the schools and all, but it really had a terrible time. But that wasn't the idea of Peter Jones and Joseph Sawyer. Please. No. They were snobby. They were speakers. They wanted the state the credit. They wanted to speak their language, and they wanted to retain their self-government, economic independence, everything. It's all terrific, I think. And a New Credit, they do. This is it, actually, folks. I think I'm right in time. This is a picture about 1900, And sure, the police. I'm not saying like everybody at New Credit became farmers. Not at all. Some didn't go for that lifestyle, and they preferred. They worked on farms and traveled up north, hunted and fished and all. But a large majority, the majority did farm, to my satisfaction. But others did other things, and this group is berry picking, and that is a great shot, and I'm very pleased to get it. And it just, I think, 2 words. Persistence, that's the vision of Tecumseh that's taken on by these people. And betrayal, because they did everything, they went right by the rule book, it wasn't enough. Thank you very much. Miigwech.